When a lot of people think about water pollution, they probably think of people throwing things into lakes or rivers, maybe them flying in from the wind or birds dropping them in, but the truth is a lot more complicated. Pollution can happen anywhere in the water cycle, but it usually happens at points where humans are using it. Historically, people obviously used water to drink, but they also used rivers as their trash cans because waste was the problem of the people who lived downstream. During times of plague and epidemics, they actually would throw dead bodies in the river when they didn't have time to bury them, which would then travel and take the plague downriver. Super ew. People also would bury their trash in trash heaps, which have become treasure troves of information for archaeologists to learn about the habits of people, their hobbies, what they ate, and how they lived. As people began to condense into cities because they were able to build more complex structures, all the waste from all of these people became a really big problem. Streets were made with gutters in the center so that people could walk on the sides near their houses, and all of the waste from human waste and animal waste that they all had to have to get around and to eat, and the food waste could just be carried off into the rivers and, again, be the problem of people downstream. People in this time had to wear boots to literally wade through ankles deep waste that existed all over town. Women's dresses of the people who were the peasant class would have also been a little bit shorter, and the women would have worn boots as well because they had to, keep the poop off of their clothes. The people who lived in the higher society, right, just threw their waste out the window, so parasols and hats were super popular. And these upper class people who literally lived up had some of their own passages in certain cities so that they didn't have to get their beautiful floor-length gowns dirty in everybody else's poop and the poop of the lower class who lived literally below them. So you think about ball gowns, these are people who lived a totally different life than all of the other people who had to deal with the literal waste. You can see these structures in places like Milan. Then humans got really creative and decided to start building piers and pipelines to push the waste farther out into the river and into the ocean to try to preserve the shoreline water for use. But the problem is, all of that waste had a way of just coming back. So people had to get creative to get clean water from distant locations, like building canals and aqueducts to bring water into populated city centers. You can still drink out of fountains fed by them in Switzerland and Rome if you go. Also, they would dig wells to access the underground water in aquifers, and in some parts of the world, they dug giant step wells so that lots of people could get water at one time. Eventually, people realized that clean water resources were going to start to run out, and they needed to start cleaning waste out of the water before they put it back into the environment. So Scotland was the site of the first water treatment facility, where they ran their dirty water through a filtration system full of sand to remove all of the particles before putting it back into the river. Put all of this together and we have our current water system, where we bring water to treatment facilities to clean it before it goes in pipes under the streets and into our houses. We then use it in our toilets and in our sinks, where they both meet in the sewer system that leaves our house, goes out underneath of the streets, and then carries on to water treatment facilities that clean the water before it's released back into the environment. So we've really cleaned up our act with the 12% in the public sector, but the other sources generate heavily as well. Let's start with roadways. All of the oil and trash and everything that you see on the roads sits there until it rains, and then all of it gets pushed into the storm drains and feeds directly into our water systems without being filtered. Everything on your yard and your driveway goes right down the drain, down the street, into the storm drain, where it collects into big culverts and then gets diverted into drainage canals. Sometimes they look like grassy areas, sometimes they're concrete, but they go right into the streams and, you guessed it, into the ocean. They're usually marked that say no dumping because they go right to the river or into the ocean if you're close enough. The next major source of pollution is agriculture. When we spray pesticides and fertilizers on fields, a lot of times they're not completely absorbed by the crops. When it rains and water runs off of the fields into streams, they then collect into the waterways and pollute them. When animal waste is left exposed on farms and it rains, it can literally make rivers of poop that wash down into the watersheds and collect in rivers and streams. Almost all manufacturing requires water in some way, shape, or form, and so factories often wind up with water that's polluted with the chemicals from production that can run directly back into the waterways without being cleaned, depending on the country that the factory it's in. Since power production accounts for 45% of our water use, there's obviously going to be a chance that it can cause water pollution. Most power plants are located near waterways because it's required in order to generate the electricity in the first place. Coal, in particular, after burning it, creates this really toxic ash, and it's stored in coal ash ponds to keep it from blowing all over the environment, which can break and get into the waterways. Nuclear requires water in order to keep the rods cool after they have finished their reactions, and those pools also cause a potential risk to leaking radiation into the waterways. Remember, water doesn't just go through streams to the ocean, it also gets absorbed by the ground. The sand and the soil do a pretty good job of filtering, but when lots and lots of chemicals get leached into the ground, we wind up with groundwater sources becoming polluted, and then wells and aquifers aren't a good source for clean water anymore anyway, and the ground is contaminated too. While we've done a pretty good job of removing human waste from our water systems, we've created a whole lot of chemical waste, which is often invisible. It finds its way into oceans and streams, but when the water evaporates and the cycle starts again, the pollutants don't. And so we leave the water in the oceans and streams more and more concentrated with these pollutants every year, which get into the food chain. The aquifers, on the other hand, wind up becoming more and more contaminated as water leaches down into them, and it doesn't evaporate, but it's going to take the Earth millions of years to clean them up. This amazing installation on Mud Island in Memphis, Tennessee is a really striking reminder of the interconnectedness of all of the water systems in the United States and how anything done in one place is going to impact the people and the plants and the animals at any other point. It also shows that all of these rivers eventually lead to the ocean, and if we care about our oceans and the life in them, we like to recreate and go to the beach. We want to have streams and ponds that are nice for the fish to live in, rivers to be able to go tubing down, swimming pools to be able to enjoy, and anything else that we like to do in the water. We have to be very thoughtful that everything that we put into the ecosystem affects every other place on Earth, and that we have to keep our environment safe for ourselves and for the generations to come. That was super fun.